History has a dangerous and persistent habit of confusing passivity with peace. When we look back at the reign of Viserys I, the annals of Westeros attempt to paint the portrait of a good man, a benevolent patriarch who presided over the absolute apex of Targaryen power. We are presented with an era where dragons filled the skies, where the realm was bathed in a golden, uninterrupted summer, and where the horrors of war were kept safely at bay. But if we strip away the romanticized ink of historians, if we ignore the propaganda of a peaceful era and subject this reign to a cold, clinical, psychological autopsy, the illusion of the good king shatters completely. What we are actually observing is not a golden age. It is the incubation period of a catastrophic apocalypse. Viserys Targaryen was not a harbinger of peace. He was a victim of his own pathological complacency. Today, we are going to deconstruct the tragedy of a man whose chronic conflict avoidance, passive-aggressive leadership, and desperate need for approval metastasized into a psychological rot that tore an empire apart. We are going to examine how the terminal disease of a people-pleaser brought down the dragons. To understand the structural and systemic failure of Viserys, we must first define the fundamental function of a monarch. A king is, by definition, a mechanism for making decisions, and decisions inherently breed conflict. To rule is to displease someone. To rule effectively is to possess the psychological fortitude to look into the eyes of ambitious men and women and say, no. But Viserys suffered from a profound, paralyzing psychological terror of conflict. He did not desire peace out of a high-minded moral philosophy or a strategic vision for the realm. He desired it out of a deep, desperate, and entirely selfish need for personal equilibrium. We must clinically diagnose the trait of people-pleasing. In our daily lives, we often mistake people-pleasing for kindness. We view those who compromise, who bend, who seek harmony as empathetic souls. But in the arena of absolute power, people-pleasing is a devastating pathology. A people-pleaser does not act out of love for the people they are appeasing. They act out of an inability to self-soothe in the presence of tension. They will tell everyone exactly what they want to hear in isolated rooms, creating a labyrinth of contradictory promises. They will sacrifice the long-term survival of the institution just to ensure that the current conversation does not end in an argument. This pathology became the defining architecture of Viserys' reign. When he made the monumental decision to name his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir, he fundamentally altered the geopolitical, legal, and patriarchal foundations of Westeros. It was a decision that required an iron will. To secure a female heir in a deeply misogynistic society meant that the king had to engage in ruthless enforcement of the law. It required the systematic dismantling of any dissenting factions, the careful curation of his small council, and the absolute isolation of those who would challenge his decree. Viserys did none of these things. Having made the hardest decision of his life, he immediately retreated into the comfort of cowardice. He named Rhaenyra his heir, but then he married Alicent Hightower, drawing the most ambitious and traditional house in the realm into the very heart of the royal family. He fathered male heirs, creating the exact biological alternative his enemies needed. And then, he reinstated Otto Hightower as Hand of the King, the very man architecting the downfall of his chosen successor. Viserys believed that he could hold these violently opposing forces together simply by asking them nicely. He engaged in a textbook psychological defense mechanism: profound, impenetrable denial. He believed that if he simply ignored the tectonic plates shifting beneath his throne, the earthquake would never come. By refusing to establish absolute boundaries, Viserys did not prevent a war. He guaranteed one. He radicalized his own family. His insistence that everyone simply get along was not an act of love. It was a passive-aggressive abdication of his duty. We see the absolute failure of this leadership style perfectly encapsulated in the aftermath of the incident at Driftmark. When his son Aemond loses an eye in a violent brawl with Rhaenyra's children, a healthy leader would recognize that the factional Cold War had turned hot. A king would investigate, pass judgment, punish the guilty, and establish a firm, undeniable hierarchy to prevent future bloodshed. But Viserys is physically and mentally incapable of navigating this trauma. Surrounded by a bleeding son, a furious wife, and a defensive daughter, his psychological operating system crashes. Instead of delivering justice, Viserys delivers a gag order. He threatens to rip out the tongues of anyone who speaks the truth about Rhaenyra's children. He does not heal the wound. He simply bandages it tightly and forbids anyone from mentioning that it is bleeding. He demands that the two factions apologize and embrace. This is the ultimate toxicity of the conflict-avoidant leader, demanding that others suppress their survival instincts and swallow their rage, simply so the leader does not have to endure an uncomfortable reality. This psychological paralysis is perfectly, brutally mirrored in his physical condition. The slow, necrotic disease that eats away at Viserys's flesh throughout his reign is not a random medical tragedy to evoke our sympathy. It is a brilliant, agonizing somatic metaphor. The physical rot of the king is the exact, microscopic manifestation of the structural rot of his kingdom. The Iron Throne is legendary for rejecting those who are unfit to sit upon it. But the throne does not cut Viserys because he is evil. It cuts him because he lacks structural integrity. As Viserys continues to administer his people-pleasing placebos, avoiding the harsh political surgeries required to save his realm, his own body begins to fall apart. First a finger, then an arm, then half of his face. He is literally disintegrating under the weight of his own cognitive dissonance. The more he compromises, the more he rots. Every time he looked the other way, every time he forgave an unforgivable transgression to keep an artificial peace, another piece of his flesh died. Lies, denial, and suppressed trauma do not just evaporate. They turn toxic. They poison the host. Towards the end of his life, Viserys becomes a hostage in his own castle, placed on continuous life support. He is heavily medicated, floating in a haze of milk of the poppy. This narcotic haze is the ultimate physical realization of his mental state. The milk of the poppy does not cure the disease, it merely numbs the pain of the rot. Just as his willful blindness did not cure the factionalism in his court, it merely numbed his awareness of the impending slaughter. He was a walking corpse, presiding over a dying era. The absolute apex of this tragedy, and the ultimate manifestation of his passive-aggressive trauma response, occurs during his final public appearance. Viserys drags his decaying, half-skeletal body to the throne room, and later to the family dinner table. Audiences and in-universe historians often read this as a triumphant, heartbreaking moment of a dedicated father trying to unite his divided house one last time. Clinically, it is the exact opposite. It is a terrifying, deeply selfish display of a man transferring his own unresolved trauma onto his children. Viserys sits at the head of the table, his golden mask hiding the fact that half of his face has rotted off, and begs his family to drop their grievances. He asks them to pretend that the decades of political maneuvering, the vicious insults, the spilled blood, and the existential zero-sum threat of succession do not exist. He removes his mask to show them his horrific visage. This is not vulnerability. It is a weapon. He uses his own terminal suffering as a guilt trip, a passive-aggressive tool to force a temporary, artificial smile onto the faces of people who are silently preparing to slaughter one another. He is pleading with them to hold their breath until he is safely dead. He wants the illusion of a happy family for his final night on Earth, regardless of what it costs them the morning after. It is the ultimate act of psychological cowardice disguised as a father's love. He leaves them with a catastrophic, unsolvable mess, steps into the grave, and essentially says, "I did my best. This is your problem now." When Viserys finally takes his last breath, the illusion of his peaceful reign instantly evaporates. A leader who flees from conflict does not extinguish it. He merely compresses it into a highly volatile explosive. The people-pleasing rot that consumed his body finally, inevitably, consumes the realm. Unlike a tyrant who burns his kingdom down in a fit of rage, or a mad king who slaughters his subjects for pleasure, Viserys allowed his kingdom to burn through sheer, suffocating apathy. He is the ultimate proof that a weak man with good intentions is often far more dangerous than a strong man with dark ones. A tyrant gives you an enemy to unite against. A people-pleaser slowly dissolves the very ground you stand on, smiling at you the entire time. Viserys I did not leave behind a legacy of love or unity. He left behind a fractured family, a continent about to be bathed in the apocalyptic fire of civil war, and a throne room filled with the ashes of his own house. He died exactly as he ruled, slowly, painfully, and entirely, willfully blind to the monster he had nurtured in the dark.